when people say emotional intelligence, it is incredibly broad. From your background, what would you say you think emotional intelligence is?
That's a really good question, actually.
Hybrid working has massively shifted. Rather than just moving everyone back into the office, we just need to also look at how can we make hybrid working better. We have to be so much more intentional of carving out time, not just to check in on performance, but to check in on people as well.
Psychological safety, what does that mean?
How safe somebody feels within the working environment to be honest, to share their ideas, to maybe try something out and it goes wrong and them to tell you that's happened. And it's not about how safe we think they should feel, it's about how that person feels. And that can be quite challenging because you might think you've done everything and yet that person's still not coming forward.
Have you got any tips that people can take away and put into action almost immediately that you think would set themselves up for this journey of emotional intelligence and psychological safety? On this episode, we talk to Fran, our in-house expert at Westpeak. We cover all things EQ and generational leadership. Topics like being more reflective, empathy, and having psychological safety covered. Something for everyone in this episode. Enjoy. Fran, welcome, our EQ expert. Do you want to give us a quick update on what you've been doing, who you are, and why we're sat here today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really amazing to be here on the other side of podcasting, which is exciting. So a little bit about me. I worked in debt collection for a number of years, which doesn't immediately make you think of emotional intelligence. But actually, so much of the relationship building, the managing conflict, having empathy for people was built up. And my curiosity was really piqued through that career. I then moved into looking after teams of leaders in a FMCG business. And there I did a qualification in emotional intelligence and positive relationships. So really looking at those core components of self-awareness, self-management, empathy and relationship management and how we can bring them into the workplace, especially as leaders. And so looking at when we're creating courses previously and at Westpeak, it's actually how do we weave that in to all of our conversations because it's just such a prominent topic.
Yeah, I love that everyone is talking about it at the moment, rightly so as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing this episode back again because I think I'm going to learn quite a bit too, especially my background in the military is probably devoid of everything that you've just mentioned. And then going into supporting businesses at the moment, everyone is asking how they can be better and relate more to Gen Z millennial. I think I feel like I'm a millennial. I'm probably a lot older than that. But we're going to find out how we can enhance our performance when we are leading Gen Z millennial and Gen Alpha now as well. Or hopefully, that's what I think we're going to get out of this episode.
Yeah,
with you, Fran.
absolutely.
Where would you like to start? Where would be best place to start? Is it definitions of what they actually are?
Well, I guess to throw it back at you is what would you say you think emotional intelligence is? Because I think there's a lot out there. And when people say emotional intelligence, it is incredibly broad. So actually, from your background, what would you say?
That's a really good question, actually. And I've probably never been asked it before. So yeah, you throw me off straight away, which is good. Keep me on my toes. We get so many different questions from our clients as to what it actually is. I think everyone's definition probably changes. Is there an actual definition? And is that why there's so much ambiguity out there at the moment?
It depends on who you read up about. I always like to come back to the 4 fundamental components of emotional intelligence. And people like to think about the more jazzy ones around like empathy and relationship building and how that can really help you with conflict. But the foundation for emotional intelligence always comes back to the self-awareness piece, because if you don't have that, it's really difficult to then have awareness of others' feelings, others' emotions. And then how can you use that in your relationships? If you're not aware of your own triggers, your own values, how can you use them to manage your decisions or your emotional reactions when you're in a difficult position? So for me, emotional intelligence, there's a lot of different things that come into it, but it always comes back to that self-awareness piece.
And do you think it's such a big issue, especially for sort of my generation that aren't very reflective? Maybe that's a sweeping statement, but whenever we deal with clients and support them, we ask that question, who is reflective and how often do you reflect on your life and your emotions? And not many people say they are. I mean, it's becoming more prevalent now and more people are practicing it, but I think not knowing who you are and how you respond to certain situations and emotions it's just not something that my generation probably covered.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more out there. I mean, people are using Instagram and TikTok to help to learn about these different topics. See, not all of that is accurate, and there's also that challenge out there as well. But I think generationally, there is a difference within that reflectiveness that you do notice. But I think because it's being brought into the workplace by HR, by different leaders, by the newer generations, it's the awareness is increasing across all generations of actually its importance. And even if people aren't labeling it as emotional intelligence, they're going, oh, actually, I do need to know how I lead. I do need to recognize what my communication preferences, what my values are, because they all impact the way that you are interacting with people.
So to help others, we have to help ourselves understand ourselves first, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like with everything, like rest, like you can only give more to people when you take that time for yourself. But if we're thinking about relationship side of things, it's the same. Is we need to understand our natural preferences to know when we need to adjust them so we can recognize someone else's. And like I say, that might be in communication, it might be in feedback styles. Um, but without knowing what ours is, we often make that assumption that the way I think or the way I operate, the way my emotions function is the same as the way everyone else's also function. And when making that assumption, that means that we can make more judgments on others. We can assume that our way is the right way and it's worked with all the other people before. So why is it not working with this one person? But actually, that awareness piece enables us to be more adaptable. Absolutely.
We obviously support clients from tech startups all the way through to global businesses. What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing at the moment from this equality and diversity and emotional intelligence standpoint?
The biggest question that I'm often getting asked at the moment is around hybrid working and how people connect with people in the same way, because you're not having those. People often describe them as like water cooler moments where you're just going to the kitchen and
Having a
maybe a
chat.
coffee together, and that isn't happening in the same way. And so the relationships between people aren't necessarily as strong as they previously were, which is why there's also been more people demanding that like return to office, either employees, but also leaders and leadership teams are looking at how can they bring people back in because we're losing some of that people focus. But hybrid working has massively shifted. And actually, rather than just moving everyone back into the office, we just need to also look at how can we make hybrid working better. Um, and I would say the key with that is around the intentionality. You don't get the accidental moments where you can see someone at their desk and you can notice that they are upset, or you can recognize something is going on in their day, or just a casual catch up in the kitchen. And so we have to be so much more intentional with hybrid working of carving out time, not just to check in on performance, but to check in on people as well.
So the back end of lockdown and COVID, seemingly everyone wanted to work from home. That was the biggest thing out there, wasn't it? People were wanting to do 9 to 5 from home, 5 days a week. And now it's almost shifted. People want a sense of belonging again, and they have those water cooler moments, and they want to come back into the office. How are businesses coping with that? Because that's a massive shift, isn't it? It's almost a 180 from maybe 2 years ago when no one wanted to be in the office. Suddenly everyone wants to come back in again.
Yeah, and I think people want both. I think they want the flexibility that home working offers them around their lives. And I think they want the sense of belonging that they get from the office. And businesses are still massively navigating actually what does that look like? What does a good split look like? And I think there's not a absolute 3 days you must be in the office, 2 days you must be here. I think it's different business to business, but I think it's about how that business creates spaces, regardless of whether it's in the office or working from home, that it's set up to work in that way. Because just bringing people into the office doesn't necessarily create more connection. It can help, but actually, how are we, again, being intentional when we're bringing people in? Otherwise, people are going, I could have just done this at home.
And could they do that at home? Because quite often we've sent, not West Peak, but businesses and clients have sent people to work from home, but haven't considered where they're working and how they're working. It's a one-bedroom flat, or they've got their laptop on their laps and they're sat on their bed, for example. So are we investing in that home environment to allow them to work effectively from home? Are we setting them up for success, or are we just allowing them to try their best at home but not being successful? Should we be investing more in that home environment so that they are just as productive as home?
It's something that definitely businesses could look at, but again, I think it depends on the role that that person does. Like at Westmead, we are very frequently traveling. So when I'm at home, I'm only needing to do like a little bit of design work, and so and so on. So I'm quite happy in my one bed flat. And actually it works really well for me. But it's again, it's the personal preferences, and for businesses taking the time to understand what is it that their employees looking for, what is it they want to offer as a business, how is it that if they aren't in the office, they are still going to invest in connecting people and working on people's development, because that's something I hear is where we're not in the office, not only are we not connecting with people, but how do we develop the newer people within the business when you're not getting those observational moments, that, oh, just jump in here with me in this meeting on that off chance. We have to be a lot more planned with it.
I think you're right. And I think we have to almost go back through and look at all of our processes. I was speaking to one client and they had a new starter, and the new starter had been onboarded and hadn't seen anyone face to face for 3 months. It'd all been done virtually or by Zoom and by Teams. So actually, how do they build up that rapport and that trust and those relationships, which you've alluded to are so critical? I mean, look at any of our backgrounds and yours as well. Your peers and colleagues who you've been working with on that high-performing team, you've spent days, day in, day out, learning about your team, what makes them tick, what doesn't, what demotivates them. But how do you do that when it's all virtual or when we're working from home? It's difficult. And you're trying to emulate that high-performance team environment in a business via Teams. It's almost unachievable.
Not necessarily unachievable, but I think it's definitely a lot harder. And generationally, you've got that newer generations coming in, and what previously happened is people were able to observe expected behaviors and those conversations were a lot easier, whereas different generations are coming in and a leader is going, well, they're not turning up on time, or they're behaving in X, Y, and Z way. They're bringing their phones to meetings, or they're doing multiple different things. And when you're in an office environment, people can observe what the behaviors everyone else is doing and they can learn from that. But actually, it also can be challenging from that generational perspective is how do we having those honest conversations rather than just relying on the observational side of things. And we can only do that with emotional intelligence and creating trust and authenticity, because that's huge for the newer generations. They're so used to everything being online, everything being open and being able to access so much information. And they're demanding so much more honesty from the people that they're working for. And so those demands are coming in quite high for leaders, and not all the leaders are equipped to manage that.
So is the issue actually with our generation not understanding, as opposed to Gen Alpha, Millennials, Gen Z not wanting to work as hard, which is the perception at the moment, isn't it? It's a stereotypical perception.
That is
There's some different nuances.
yeah, that's something I've heard. And I remember seeing this post, I think it was on Instagram, because I am a millennial and so therefore I love social media. And it was newspaper articles throughout the ages, and it was like every single generation, I think it was for over 100 years, had said this new generation doesn't want to work, they're really lazy in some sort of way. And it just happened every single generation. So I don't think it's necessarily this generation. I think that is a dynamic that has been going on for a really long time, is that because the younger generation like to work in a different way than the generation that is existing in the workforce, there can be some challenges and some friction. And the key to that is to understanding, because not every Gen Z or every alpha is going to want to work in exactly the same way. There might be some trends, they might be better with tech, there might be ideas that they can bring, but actually the key is to understanding rather than assuming that there's that laziness there, or understanding if someone is turning up late, actually it sounds really silly, but do they know that it's a hard start time for 9 a.m? Because if it's someone's first job, they're new into the workforce, we almost expect certain things from people, but if we're not clear on what our expectations are, and if we've not built up that honest relationship with them, how can we expect people to know?
Which is difficult. As you were talking, I was just trying to think back to some examples between you and I as well. I won't bring those up, but it was quite eye-opening, and it was good to hear like your feedback as well when you started with Westpeak in the business. From what you're saying, it sounds like we just shouldn't make assumptions. But the difficulty there is micromanaging. By always checking and almost over-explaining, it might come across as, or you feel as if you're micromanaging. Because I think that's quite difficult to not think you're micromanaging, but allow you to do what you want in the way that you want to do it with your own style. But actually you're saying that you need clarity in terms of that messaging on the process or the task.
Yes, I think assumptions come from that lack of understanding, but understanding doesn't need to come from a place of micromanaging. Once we have an understanding of someone and we've built up that trust at the beginning, because we make that person feel like we care about them as an individual, not just for the work that they do, but we care about their career development, what's going on for them outside of work. If they're in a space where they might need to change the way that they work, that actually that's not a huge inconvenience to you or the business, that actually they're giving something to the business and the business is giving something to them, and it's more like a partnership, is more of an expectation and more what has been the world of work has been moving towards. And so once that understanding is almost built quite early on in that relationship, then it's the maintenance of it rather than the micromanaging of constantly needing, like you say, to check in and to dig into everything, because that trust is there for that person then to come to you. But if we've not established the trust and the relationship early in the beginning, then it could feel like micromanaging, because it's hard for that person to be honest with you, and it's hard because you've not necessarily been honest with them from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I had an example from a law firm that we were supporting recently, and one of the partners was saying that when he came up through his sort of training when he was an associate, it'd get to 5 o'clock on a Friday, and if a piece of work hadn't been done, he would stay well on into the night to get it done. And then he said more recently he had an example where a piece of work hadn't been finished, and he'd set his associates the task of completing it, got to 5 o'clock, and it was left. So there's a massive generational difference there in terms of that mindset. But then is that a case that he hadn't explained correctly the importance of getting that work done? Or does he just have to accept that actually that's the way of working nowadays, that it will get done when it needs to be done, but that could be on the Monday morning, not necessarily the Friday? What went wrong in that example, do you think? Or how could he have coped slightly better?
I think one of the keys there is around communication between the leader and the people carrying it out. But I think the main question is, did it need to be done on the Friday? And why? Because actually, what's the impact to waiting until Monday? Because somebody working really late on a Friday can run into their weekend, their well-being. They come back on the Monday, they're maybe not as well rested, they can't give as much. So if it didn't need to be done on the Friday, actually, it's good that they had that autonomy to step away and go, hey, I'll finish it on Monday. And that, again, speaking generationally, is something that doesn't necessarily sit as well. It's we should finish it because it needs to be done. And well-being is also something that's coming in a lot more, and people setting those boundaries of, well, actually, I know it doesn't need to be done today, and I'm happy to work on it. I'm going to give my absolute all to this project. It's not about the laziness piece. It's I am going to invest. I'm really invested in making sure this is done really, really well. But it's now the weekend. I've now finished my working day, and I will pick that up again on Monday, and then I will be really invested and I will give it my all. But it's almost, again, those expectations that people are bringing to the workplace is communication doesn't need to be done that day. And if it does need to be done that day, why? And actually being okay to set that boundary at the end of it as well.
So I think he was struggling. He thought that he had explained that quite explicitly, it needs to be done, but he was failing to work out how to motivate them to almost go above and beyond and complete the task. I think that's where they're struggling, especially when he was coming up and through, it was all financially driven, like commercially driven, whereas now it's not. And it's quite eye-opening how you can motivate the newer generations or the younger generations, not just by paying bonuses and giving them pay rises.
Yeah, oh, that's really funny, because often when we'll talk about motivation in sessions, and people will say, like, what's your motivator? And they'll come forward and there'll always be someone in the room who will say, Well, it's money. It always comes back to money. It doesn't matter how great you make the working environment or how much somebody likes their manager or their work. It always just comes back to money. And then this debate will ensue over, actually, there's someone in my team who values X and there's someone in my team who values this. So it could be some person values challenge, somebody else values curiosity or stability. And so the key is understanding what is it that motivates that person, and in that example, what is it that motivated them, and what is it that made them make the decision not to do it. I think that's a follow-up conversation, is what made them decide, if they knew it was important, to not do it. Was it because it was Friday? Was it because they didn't understand the importance? Actually, did that piece of work that was given to them not resonate in any way, and they weren't able to see how it linked to business goals, they weren't able to how it linked to personal goals. And again, just really getting that understanding and getting that clarification, to making sure we're being clear on our expectations.
Psychological safety has come up a couple of times. Does that link into what you're saying?
Yes.
Can you give us a quick overview of psychological safety? Because that's coming up more often than not now, especially with a lot of our clients. And I'm asking these questions just to instill the conversation as well. But you are our expert at Westpeak. So psychological safety, what does that mean? And how can we incorporate that into our leadership style and the way that we are running our businesses?
Great question.
Thank you.
Psychological safety is about how safe somebody feels within the working environment to be honest, to share their ideas, to maybe try something out and it goes wrong, and them to tell you that's happened. And it's not about how safe we think they should feel. So we might go, well, I've done everything I can, so they should feel psychologically safe. It's about how that person feels. And that can be quite challenging, because you might think you've done everything and yet that person's still not coming forward, which would suggest there's some level of disconnect of they don't feel safe, even though you've done everything you can to try and create that space where they can be honest and they can try something and it doesn't go well. So it's, again, yes, we can look at it generally, but it's also more nuanced. Some people might take more time. You might want to create a psychologically safe environment where you have a team meeting, and what that looks like is everyone throwing ideas forward, and that whole no bad ideas, let's just innovate and build on top of each other, and really collaborate on what's the best way to do this. And people feel safe to do that. Loads of people are throwing their ideas in, but that space doesn't work for everybody. Some people don't feel safe, no matter how comfortable they feel with their colleagues, in that really open environment, and it's just not something that resonates with them. So it's looking for ways, yes, people can feel safe as a group, but also on that one-on-one if that doesn't land with them.
So how do you know when you've achieved it? How do you know when you've met that psychological safety level?
Because that person can and does come to you when something happens, and you're not having to find something that's happened. Say there's been a mistake made, you will know because they will be coming to you with that information. So you're not always having to be the one asking. They are coming to you with ideas. They are coming to you and saying, oh, I tried this really great thing and I thought it was going to work really well and then it didn't. Because they feel comfortable enough to do that. So what you'll notice is it's not just someone saying, yes, I feel happy enough to tell you anything, because most people, if a manager asks you, oh, is there any feedback you have for me? Or, you can tell me anything. They'll go, yeah, absolutely. But it's not about what they're saying. It's about what they're doing. Are they coming forward and going, I think I've got a really good idea for how to do something that's not even my department, but because I want to make this business better, and because I know that you really value my opinion, I've got this idea that's over there. Can I share it? And that's how you know, because people are volunteering rather than you having to really pull it out of them.
Yeah, I love that. That's tying into a lot of what you've said about that motivational values piece that we do. And one of the most common ones that comes up at the moment is a sense of belonging, which always throws people. So what is that? And then when you dig into it, and that explanation that you've just alluded to, it's so eye-opening that actually we just need to not just need to explain our why, but we should be explaining the why, how your role or your task ties into the bigger picture, and how you're making a difference to clients, to internal teams, and to the business as a whole. And that really does break down those barriers when people can understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it feeds into the bigger picture. I like that. Thank you. Psychological safety. Tick. We've got a couple of different points, and we've not got much time actually, because we've had a lot of conversation already. But Ben and I earlier were chatting about quiet quitting. It used to be quiet quitting and now it's quiet coasting. Is that just a perception as well? A perception of millennials and Gen Zs probably not working to the same standard as we used to or we do? Is that actually a thing, do you think, quiet coasting now? Or is that something that we have coined?
I would say it's a bit of both. There probably is a different expectation of work-life balance than there was previously. And that example that you gave of someone left and was like, this is the end of the day, I'm going to leave it on a Friday. That from the leader's perspective might look like coasting. And there might be a lot of examples that look like coasting, but is actually someone setting boundaries for their own well-being, like going off for lunch for half an hour when there's work to be done, but actually that person might be taking a strategic break to make sure they can come back and be more focused in their work. So there is a perception piece, but we also know that disengagement is really high as well, because that sense of belonging people are not getting. So they're showing up to work, they do what they need to do, but they're not feeling connected to their businesses, either their leaders or their purposes. So they're doing what they need to do and then they're checking out.
Yeah, so 79% of leaders felt as if they were disengaged or unengaged, which is a huge number, isn't it? 79%.
Really, really, really scary actually when you think about that, because those leaders are helping create the environment for their teams. So if they feel like that, how do their teams feel and how broadly does that spread?
Yeah, that cascades through the business, and that's the toxic environment that then starts to build. Or in fact, just not a toxic culture, but a poor culture, isn't it? And that's hard to return from. So it sounds like there's a couple of quick wins that you could put in place. Not quick wins, but a couple of things that you could put in place to try and change that cultural norm and reduce that 79% of unengaged leaders. Have you got any tips that people can take away and put into action almost immediately that you think would set themselves up for this journey of emotional intelligence and psychological safety?
The first one, like I said earlier, it comes back to that self-awareness piece, is really recognizing and tapping into things like, what are your triggers? Because someone at work at some point is going to trigger you and you need to be able to respond rather than react.
No.
So simple things like pausing in the moment, and pausing always sounds like the lamest, simplest thing, but it's one of the most powerful things to, once you've grasped your awareness, to then be able to manage that. Because if we're not, we are just responding emotionally. We're responding the way we've always responded, regardless of whether that's the best response for the situation that we're in. So pausing when you're in the moment, and I like to apply the strategy of thought challenging, of just finding a question that really works for you, of like, is this who you want to be in this moment? If you're going to react angrily or you're going to react in a certain way, is this how I want to be seen? Or is this in line with my values? And finding that question that just stops you and goes, actually, I'm interrupting my thought pattern and I can decide how I want to behave, rather than just responding how I've always responded.
I can relate to that. Not looking after, I have 3 young children. So almost identifying what your best self is like in different situations. And when you step outside of that, checking yourself and thinking, actually, this is not how I want to respond.
Yeah.
Especially when you get worked up or you're tired or you're hungry or hangry. Just what is my best self? And stepping away from that, that's that trigger to step back, take some time out, and then continue in the way that you want to. Yeah.
And values can really help with that, because they help to steer us more towards the way we want to be long term rather than short term. Sometimes we'll make quick decisions and they satisfy our short term. So we might delegate something and someone doesn't do something in the way that we want to do it. And if we are not living by our values, or if we are reacting very emotionally, we'll jump into those short-term decisions. But actually pausing and interrupting that allows us to live more long-term in our fulfillment, rather than just constantly satisfying those short-term desires.
Fran, this has been great. We've covered all the definitions. We've dug in some practical tips. I've learned quite a bit myself. I'm going to be more reflective, be more self-aware, look at my empathy and my best self as well. It's been quite eye-opening. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully you have as well.
Oh, I've loved it. Yeah.
We haven't covered AI. It's come in a lot of different places. I know you've got that on your notes ready to cover. So maybe there'll be a part 2 later on.
Yeah, sounds good.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you.